Hello, my name is Jean Lewis. I'm president of the Carroll County branch 7014 of the NAACP. We're here today to interview Mr. William M. Decatur, Jr., who is a former Buffalo soldier.
10th Cavalry,
10th Cavalry.
Buffalo soldier. Well, that Buffalo soldier picked up, the Indians gave him that name.
So you want to tell us your story?
Well, I want to start the Civil War. The Civil War was 1861 to 1865. When the slaves came back from the Civil War, Congress didn't know what to do with them. So they decided to, that they form a cavalry, which consisted of the 9th and 10th Cavalry and infantry. Now this was in 1866. They drew first blood in 1867. The Buffalo soldiers, I was born in Chicago, raised in Ohio. Segregation and Jim Crow did a number on me. I looked up the word Jim Crow, which is a derogatory word, which means separate. I was in the cavalry, all black cavalry. I was a non-commissioned officer. Congress fixed it so that we had the white officers over us. I trained at a place called Fort Riley, Kansas, which was 93,000 acres. And we had horses, trucks, and I have a confession to make. I used to be lazy on Sunday. I always hated anybody on Sunday had to go to church or help clean up the area. And I used to go down to the stables and I had a pass that I could go riding on Sunday. And I used to ride over the fort grounds. Now we had desert, we had grass growing up 8 feet tall, we had water on one side, we had, I used to go just ride, just looking around. And the most interesting things that I had to see was where Fort Riley took over towns that had been abandoned during the dust storms. And the whole towns were all whole but no people. And it was a very eerie feeling to ride down the center of the street and see the doors on the saloons and the houses. You expect to see John Wayne out there with 2 guns or something. And the only thing left in those buildings were rats and coyotes and snakes and things, but just deserted. Mm-hmm. And you had to be careful of where you were, because you could get lost, disoriented. It's just like being on the water, where you get out there on the water with nothing but water, you kind of lose your directions. Yes. And it would be terrible to somebody have to come out and find you. They permitted hunters to hunt the bear and the wild animals on the reservation, but you had to have permission from the provost marshal. But we never were permitted to hunt. Just hunters come in from town, Fort Riley, from out in Old Junction City, Manhattan, and some of the surrounding areas. Now, we were trained to ride, but I had been used to horses all my life because I came in the time of the horse. When I was 16 years old or so, I used to sell horses to the Army, to the National Guard, and riding horses.
Now, where did you get these horses that you were selling to the?
Well, we would buy them from the farms, or we would have them shipped in from the West. We used to buy the horses, carloads of horses at a time. I think about 50 to a carload or so. And we would sell them to whoever would buy them. And the people used to buy them because they were transportation. They had our garbage was picked up by horses, horse pulling garbage wagons. The outback, everybody had outhouses, and that was all handled by the people called honey drippers. All your ice, which you didn't have refrigerators like you have now, so they used to have ice. They would cut big blocks of ice and put them on wagons, and the icemen would go around every day to the people with the ice boxes. And they had, my job was to empty the pans from the drip from the ice box. I hated that job. And I used to make show money by hauling ice in my little red wagon from the neighbors around there. They could get quarters worth of ice or 15 cents worth of ice. And that's how I made my show money.
When you say show money, you mean to go to the movies?
Go to the movies.
Okay.
When I was a kid. And we had, that was the way we had. I lived in town, but we had a farm. We used to go to the farm on Saturdays and Sundays. And horses, that was the way that it was just like having a used car lot. We used to trade horses for the neighbors, the surrounding farmers, and the people that riding horses and work horses and mules. And we used to, they would, if they had an animal that they couldn't control or something, we would make a trade with them and sell them something they could handle. And the circuses used to come by, Ringling Brothers, Sells Floto. There were a couple of more. Tim McCoy's circus. And they would come by and trade horses. If you had a matched team of big, pretty horses, they would trade you maybe 3 for 2. There wasn't any cash money. They would start out from Sarasota and extra 2 carloads of extra horses. And if you had if they came out to the farm and look over and they could, if they saw something they could use, they liked matched horses. If you had 2 or 4 or 6 or 8 horses, they would buy them in a heartbeat. Okay. And we used to sell ponies, 39-inch ponies, little mules and things that for the mines. They used to go and pull the coal cars up out of the mines. And see, they didn't have electric mine cars and all. That was all done by ponies and things. And I visited, we used to breed the ponies, and I visited a couple of mines, and when I saw the conditions, once those ponies were located, they would not come back up on ground for maybe 6 months or 8 months. They kept them down in the mines because they couldn't see. And that discouraged me from raising the ponies again.
I can understand that.
But to get back to the cavalry, my first assignment after cavalry school was at Fort Myer, Virginia. And we handled the president's horses, President Roosevelt, President Truman. President Truman got rid of the horses. And before that, the cavalry officers used to ride, and their wives, their officers, used to keep their horses at Fort Myer, and they would come from the Pentagon building and from the Marine Corps and from the Navy. The officers would ride even their private mounts. The government would subsidize keeping their horses, and we were always to take care of those horses. Those horses were fed 4 times a day. They were exercised. They were kept clean. They were inspected to make sure that they had medical services, and we had to make sure they were shod. To put shoes, we had our own blacksmith shop. We had our own leather making shop. We had men that were trained in those fields. And I was breaking and training horses for the Army, and I instructed some of the officers to ride. They were cavalry, and the general that was the only way they had to ride. Mm-hmm. And we furnished cadre for West Point, and I've distributed horses up and down the East Coast to the Coast Guard, to the Marines, to the Navy, and we would, we used the horses to bury people, to pull the caissons at Arlington Cemetery. Now, my job had 3 prongs to it. We furnished the ceremonial, which at the grave sites in Arlington. And if you had 1 funeral a day, which would be usually in the afternoon, or it could be morning if it was Catholic, then or you could have 2 funerals. And one time during the holidays, the ground was frozen and the weather was so bad that the bodies came into Arlington, were crowded. So I had 5 funerals in one day, which comprised of the bugler, 6 pallbearers, the firing squad, and we folded the flag at the ceremonies and presented it to the widows and widowers. And that was, oh yes, one other thing, I transported federal prisoners. I transported, not only me, but all the non-coms Those were non-commissioned officers. We transported federal prisoners to Buzzards Bay, Massachusetts, to the stockade, and to Leavenworth, Kansas. Now these were, some of them were murderers and, I mean, federal prisoners. They weren't the little non-support or anything like that. They were federal prisoners.
Well, how did you transport them?
We transport at 10:55 at Union Station in the district. The reserve car was for the soldiers transporting prisoners. And we had transporting prisoners from the south, all the way from Georgia, Alabama, Texas, Alabama, Georgia, North and South Carolina, all the way up to us. And then we would take them, that was the hub for the trains going north. In Washington was the hub for the trains going south. And they would bring the prisoners up there, and 10:55 in the evening, every evening, the last car would be for transporting prisoners.
How many people, soldiers, were a part of your company that did that activity?
Well, out of 300 soldiers that we could find right now, there's just 4 of us left right now.
During the transport, how many soldiers took part in that activity?
All the non-commissioned officers took that was a day, you know, it wasn't every day that we had that many, because actually we had less, the black soldiers had less, but to break the monotony of training and everyday stuff, we had to, this was a break, because I used to like it, because you couldn't sleep going up there until you got rid of your prisoners. And you couldn't handcuff them to the seats of the train. You had to watch them, and sometimes if you had really bad, you handcuffed them to your left side of you, because you carried your pistol on your right. And when you went over the water, you could not handcuff them. You'd had to take the handcuffs off the prisoners. So if the boat sank, that was a ferry going up to Buzzards Bay, Massachusetts. We used to go into Boston, Massachusetts, but the sailors would be up there, and they would get between you and your prisoners to try to help the prisoners escape. So then the Army would send us to Hartford, and then we would catch a bus and go into the compound at Stockade. And they used to have about 3,000 prisoners at the Stockade up in Boston, Massachusetts, up in Buzzards Bay, Massachusetts. The Kennedy compound was on one side. The compound for the soldiers was on the other. And the transports, the big transports would come in from overseas. They could only come in, they would have to plank those big ships 3 miles out. And when the prisoners were processed, they would take the prisoners to the big transport. And they kept 2 Navy PT boats 24 hours circling those ships until they were loaded, fully loaded, with thousands of prisoners to go back to take them to over in where they were fighting the Japanese and the jungles over there, Vietnam jungles and all. And that was what we did. And we used to, one thing that I always liked, we put on, we used to ride down to the monument grounds, and they had all the movie stars came in, like the lady that, Mrs. Miniver, and James Cagney, Jimmy Stewart, the Greer Garson. Those were some of the people that came in for Back the Attack. That was to get the people to buy war bonds. We did, I rode in 38 shows, exhibition rides, and 38 horse shows for Back the Attack.
Now, when you said to the monument, you mean, was that in Washington, D.C.?
At Washington, D.C.
Okay.
You see, we were stationed about a half a mile from the Washington, D.C. line.
Okay.
And we used to walk to, I think the bus fare was 15 cents or something like that. Mm-hmm. Well, we were only making $21 a month to, that was the whole month, $21. So a lot of time we would walk to the bus lines and catch the bus, or the streetcar lines. They used to run streetcar lines in Arlington up near Georgetown University, and we would ride into D.C. D.C. we could sit anywhere we wanted to on the in D.C. Now, and when you hit Virginia, you were segregated. You had to move to the back of the bus or the back of the streetcar or whatever. I never could understand that. It irked me because here we were doing the same kind of work that the whites were doing, but we had to ride the back of the bus. We were relegated to up on U Street in D.C. We could not go downtown to the movies. We could not go downtown to eat. And and I used to like to go to the Howard Theater in D.C. That's when all the big bands would come in. That would be Duke Ellington and Cab Calloway and all the big time band and entertainers. Jimmy Dorsey, Tommy Dorsey, you name it, we used to like to, I would be glad to get rid of my prisoners and take the bus back to get and come back rather on the train, and then I wouldn't have to report to be in Reveille 6 o'clock the next morning. And I used to go to spend my time at the Howard Union Jazz. I enjoyed the jazz. And I wanted to say that in the girls, there were 12 girls for every soldier walking the street in D.C. And we used to have a great time. That was a good time there. And that was the extent. And I was discharged from the Army, and I had 4 years, 2 months, and 18 days in the Army. And then they hired me back. They sent me, I mentioned that, I forgot to mention, they sent me to Bomb Reconnaissance School. I became a certified government agent, and a bomb reconnaissance agent. And they hired me back as a civilian. And I spent after that, I spent 23 years at Fort Belvoir and 5 years at the district government. And I was like a fire horse waiting to go to a fire for bomb, but thank God that they didn't have any bombings in the district.
Where was you said Fort Belmore?
Fort Belvoir.
Where was that? What state's that located in?
Fort Belvoir is in Virginia.
Okay.
That's located down, it's an engineering post. They built Shangri-La for President Roosevelt. You know it as they changed the name. That was Camp David.
Oh, okay.
They built that. The black engineers built that camp. And we used to, that was it. And we used to take care of those horses, and we were glorified horse handlers, that's all.
You mentioned your title as being Buffalo Soldiers. Tell us how you got the name, the Buffalo Soldiers, please.
The Buffalo Soldiers out west, it gets cold, believe me. When you get 30 below zero, they tell me that that's a different type of cold, but I never knew the difference. I would have on 3 pairs of socks, 2 pairs of pants, long johns, and everything. I mean, it was the plains. The wind would sweep down off those plains, and snow. You couldn't see hardly. I mean, the conditions were, it was hot. I mean, it was cold there. In the summertime, it would be 105, 110 in the shade. And I mean, one extreme to the other. And the Buffalo Soldiers got their names from the, I believe it was the Cheyenne Indians. They were Plains Indians. The soldiers, to keep warm, they would kill buffalo and have the hides and wrap the hides around them, riding out on guard duty on the plains. And from a distance, I imagine, to see them riding with their horses and wrapped up and trying to keep warm, that it would be, that's how they, and then they said that another reason said that they couldn't understand how the blacks being treated the way we were could fight so bad. And they call them, the buffalo, which was revered by the Indians, they, if a buffalo were agitated or something, the bulls would form a ring around the calves. The buffalo bulls would be facing the danger. The females would be behind them and the calves in the center. Now that was the way the buffalo did. And so the Indians call them, that's how they got the name Buffalo Soldier. And we took that as a compliment from the Indians, and that's how the Buffalo Soldiers were, that's how they got the name Buffalo Soldiers, because we took that as an honor.
You were drafted, you say?
I was drafted, yes.
So back then they had a draft also, right?
Oh yes, well, they talked about a draft when I was in high school. It took them a year and a half to get that going. Then they classified you, 1A, 1B, 4F was reject. Now, when the draft first started, if you had a bad tooth, they didn't even want you. Or something wrong with you, your eyes, or you limped, or anything wrong with you, that you were rejected. But when the Germans and the Japanese and the Italians, when they were chewing you up, then they would just take warm bodies. I mean, they were, you know what I mean? Some of those rejects were enlisted in the service. And you didn't have a choice. You either had to enlist or be jailed. Okay. And that was it. And that was, any more questions?
Yes. So you did serve out west as part of the Buffalo Soldiers?
Yeah, a 10th Cavalry. Okay. A 10th Cavalry. Well, then I was assigned to 10th Cavalry.
Explain what the importance of the 10th Cavalry.
The 10th Cavalry, there were only two places for the blacks to go. There was the 9th and 10th and the infantry. I chose cavalry because I loved horses. Mm-hmm. I was crazy about horses. I didn't need all that walking. So I took the horses. And that was how that came about. See, because you didn't have a lot of trucks. The trucks you had along those days were solid, before that, a little bit solid tire trucks. You didn't have pneumatic tires and things. And well do I know, because see, Akron was the rubber capital of the world. Akron, Ohio. They used to send the rubber to Akron, to the Goodyear, Firestone, Miller, Sun, Kelly, General. Those were some of the Goodrich. Those were some of the tire factories there. They would manufacture the tires and send them to Detroit to put on the new cars and things. And on that note, a new car, when I first, you could buy a new car for $700. Now you couldn't even buy a set of good tires hardly under that.
That's true.
It was just, but the $700 was a far cry from your salary of those times. Now you had a lot of, I went through the first Depression. Now there, men used to stand on the street corner selling apples and oranges, anything to get money. And even the towns, they paid off, like Akron, it wasn't the only one. They paid off in scrip, not money. They put a number of people to work on the roads, to fixing the roads. And you had a Conservation Corps, which were a lot of young men after the war joined well, before the war, rather, were in conservation. And they did a lot of work in the parks, and they fixed the bridle trails and built bridges, and they built to make the parks, anything to help the community. Yes. And they used to pay, at one time during the Depression, this is what I wanted to say. During the Depression, the governments, like the city of Akron, an example, they didn't, like you worked on the streets, you had crews of men, just anything to get a job, pick and shovel, working to fix the streets and all. They paid in scrip because they didn't have the money. And in other words, you could turn your scrip in 30 days and get your money. And then it got so bad about the scrip, it was like Confederate money. it was no good.
Okay.
The merchants would rather have cash because they had to pay for their goods and all, but that was during the Depression. We had a bridge called Rocky Gorge, or it was a half a mile long, the bridge. During the Depression, the people, they used to keep two policemen on one half of the bridge and the other half. And they would walk and meet and walk back. They patrolled. People used to stop their cars and just jump over the bridge. It was bad. The economy, and committed suicide.
Yes.
Because it was about a half a mile down. Those bridges were built by the Mohawk Indians up in upper New York or so, in Canada. They were the steel workers that they used to walk the bridges to build those bridges, steel workers. But that's the way it is.
Your life in the
I beg your pardon?
You talked about your life in the service and your life as a civilian. In the midst of segregated times, for you as an individual, where did you feel the most comfortable in spite of segregation? In the service or in private life?
Well, I had freedom in private life. I wasn't segregated there. I was in private life. The living was easy. I lived at home with mom and pop. I'm the oldest of 10 children. We had 7 boys and 3 girls. My father was a twin. I had twin brothers and I had twin sisters. And my brothers, 3 of them, they went into the Air Force, but I stayed in the Cavalry. And my sisters, they were college professors and all, and they doctorate degrees, all kind of degrees behind them. And my one sister was a city administrator. But that was my family.
So you preferred being in you preferred your lifestyle in the private sector as opposed to being in the military, but you served the military for quite a while, either in the service or after service.
Well, I served in the military. I served in the military as a civilian after my Army time. I had a job, you know what I mean? I had a job, and I kept government service, and I retired with 32 and a half years service, government service.
Good. So my final question to you was that you feel that your life in the military, well, overall was an advantage to you then, right?
Wait a minute, I'm trying to hear. I apologize because
That's okay. That's okay. That's
Gene,
all right.
if you want to rephrase the question for...
Yeah.
Your life compared to private as compared to military, you feel that you benefited most from your military service?
Yes, I grew up, you might as well say, in the military. I grew up in that. And that did help me because I became a government agent,
Right.
a bomb reconnaissance agent. So yes, I would say, and that carried me through. That carried me through this military.
Were you involved, as a Buffalo Soldier, were you involved in a military conflict?
No, I was, you see, in the military, for every person on the front line, it took 20 people to the word I want to use, to furnish the logistics. I mean, your bedding, your food, your transportation, your guns, your everything that on the front line, they took care of the civilians, and then they brought the bodies back. They used to take the trucks up, the Red Ball Express. They took a bunch of military and made truck drivers out of them, the Red Ball Express. That was, and they used to run 24 hours a day up and down the Autobahn in Germany, carrying supplies, take trucks up and bring the body bags with the bodies back. And also over in Italy, they had, let's see, the Red Ball Express took care of the Germans in Germany. And then over in Japan, I'm trying to think of the name of the thing that it just took 20 people on a whole to keep one man on the front lines.
Okay. Did you serve in overseas? Did you have any overseas experience?
I never had any, but I did the overseas. I was privy. I was thing to have secret, but I didn't have top secret, and I did not go. I had my hand on Hitler and Mussolini, or Hitler and Goring's cars, their armored cars. Mm-hmm. That's the first time I saw this big roadster. Goring had, Hitler's right-hand man, had this big, pretty convertible, and it had like an air horn on the side to pump air into the carburetor. That was some car. And Goring and Hitler's car was armor plated, and I can't remember what I tried to remember, but I can't remember what kind it was. But I couldn't. They wouldn't let you in it. You know, when they brought it, I was there privy to see what the a Zero plane. Oh, I didn't mention, there was no black Air Force. There were no, when I was there, when I first went in, there was no Tuskegee Airmen. There was no place for the blacks to go but to the cavalry or the infantry. Now, Benjamin Davis was a cavalry officer, both he and his father. Mm-hmm. And Benjamin Davis was General Davis, head of the Tuskegee Airmen. Now you had Joe Louis was a cavalryman, Jackie Robinson, and I saw that Jackie Robinson became an officer. Okay. When I visited a museum in Kansas City, Missouri, I asked about Jackie Robinson in this picture. Oh, we don't have one of those. But when I walked in the museum, right on a bulletin board, there was a picture of Jackie Robinson. I went and got the curator and everything and showed him. He was a Buffalo soldier. Oh, okay. He was in uniform. Mm-hmm. And one other thing, I hope you can, I hope you can stop it until I get my thoughts together. One other thing, they called us coloreds then. They didn't call you Negro or blacks or anything, but you were coloreds. Mm-hmm. Now they had 2 water fountains when I first went into, first assigned to Fort Myer. Now, they were just alike. They had a sign on there, coloreds, and they had one on there, white. Now, if I drank out of the white side, I could be arrested. But If he drank out of my side, there was nothing to it. I was to step back and let him drink. That's a soldier. I mean, that's the way that the Army was set up. We were just set up to furnish orderlies for the officers. We were keep their boots clean, keep their spurs shine, keep their uniforms, keep their beds clean, and all like housework. Yes. Orderlies. Well, see, the term in the cavalry was dog robbers. That was the term. They were dog robbers. Now that goes way back, that term.
That's what I was going to ask. What did dog robbers mean?
Well, you know them as orderlies.
Okay.
Now, when I was a civilian, or as the war went on, like those big houses, like you get General Marshall, General Arnold, which was, he's a 5-star general. General Marshall was a 5-star general. He was head of the Army. That was General Marshall. General Arnold, he was head of the Air Force. At one time, Fort Belvoir had a number of officers, and as the war went on, they dispatched them to other places. And we were there actually to serve the officers. That's the way it was rigged up. That's my opinion. That's the way we were treated.
What do you think of today's lifestyle, the young folks as compared to your lifestyle when you were, say, just venturing out to go into the military, 16, 17, 18 years old? What do you think of today's lifestyle?
Oh man, they had peaches and cream now, because it isn't segregated. Because now, if I could have drawn the money that they pay a soldier today, I would have still been there. But they don't do it. Even in Civil War time, the government would pay when you died $255. They still do it today. You get no more money than that, $255. The government moves kind of slow on those things.
That's true. You have some medals on. Can you tell me what they stand for?
One is a victory medal. One is a victory medal. One is a victory medal. One's a World War II. One is a good conduct medal, and a medal over here, another one. I had 4 of them. I had four medals there, and when I show you my shadow box, I can show you the other ones.
Okay.
But
go ahead, I'm sorry, finish.
Victory medal, I have to stop and think. World War II. Let me see. Oh, Military District of Washington, and oh heck, I'm sorry, I can't remember. I'd have to look at my discharge to tell you.
The significance of your scarf and your hat.
This is what the Buffalo soldiers wear. We wore Stetson hats, Florsheim boots with spurs. I had the best when I shipped. Well, they were issued to me, but I had the best when I, at my first consignment in D.C., in Arlington. We had the best there. But you see, when I was coming up, we didn't have the best horses. We were furnished the mounts for that the other ones used up, rejects. And we got them. That was the old soldiers. That was even before my time. They didn't have a monopoly on that. They got the junk. And when I first went in there, we did not have rifles. We did not have rifles. It wasn't issued to us. And when we finally got rifles, I think I was there about maybe 3 months, 2.5, 3 months. Then we got our rifles. They had enough to go around because they were sending them overseas. Okay. At one time, we had, the only meat we had was sausage meat. That was, and I don't like sausage today.
I can understand that.
Now, I'll tell you one other, other than that, after they got things going, you know, see, because United States was caught with their pants down around their ankles. That's exactly what it was. When the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, the Navy was in there. See, the Army wasn't there. It was just Navy. Navy, Pearl Harbor, over in Hawaii. I didn't even know where Pearl Harbor was. I remembered going to the movies, and at 3 o'clock, they cut the movie off and told everybody, report back to your double time, report back to your company, and stay there. Nobody was permitted to come in the fort or go out. And they had the MPs and the police department and everybody scouring up all the officers, all the men in the cities and sending them back to the fort. You know what I mean? That were over, it was on Sunday, and they were going into town and send them back, but you were not permitted to go in or out. And the Buffalo Soldiers at the Pentagon, they didn't used to lock the doors at the Pentagon before the war. But the day that they declared war, Buffalo Soldiers at the doors, backing the security guards up. They had the weapons and security guards there, the Pentagon. The Buffalo Soldiers, see, we were 10th Cavalry, and the 9th, they had, during World War I, the people wanted riots in the district. And they were the ones with the officers going down, controlling the people wanted money from World War I and all like that. In the district, Buffalo Soldiers were with them. You know what I mean? Just clearing them up or herding them out. Yes. It was almost like the time of how they had what they called Tent City when Bobby Kennedy died. You remember that they had people camping out on the malls and almost like Occupy. Yes. Only they had tents. They didn't have nice tents and all. They had cardboard boxes and everything else, all of that.
Mr. Decatur, can I ask you how old you are now?
I'm 93 years old.
You've seen an incredible amount of change over your lifetime, and it seems to me you've had a really rich life. Yes.
I did.
You did.
I can't complain about that.
Yeah. What do you think is what you would kind of tell people is kind of the secret of how you've remained so kind of vital? You're still working at the church here, cooking for the church.
Oh.
You still have all of
No,
these.
the chefs are back there.
Yeah.
I'm not,
You're
the
not.
chefs are back there. I'm not, I can't take that on. But
What do you think is kind of the secret of how you've kind of engaged with this really vital life and rich life you've led? In the face of a lot of things that were incredibly repressive, you seem to have flourished. So.
well, the other thing, just do all I can say is just do the best you can. That's all I can say. Just do what you can do, and whatever is the right thing. Just do the right thing.
Yes.
I can't say too much about that. Just try to live a clean life.
So you got those values from your parents, I'm assuming.
Well, they were help, and that was a big help. That was a start.
Are the Buffalo Soldiers still an active part of the makeup of the Army at this point? Or has that
No.
been disbanded?
Well, they still work with the Army because the Buffalo Soldiers are comprised of a lot of ex-service people that came along, like the wars of Vietnam and you name it. Even they helped. See, because we were the first.
Okay.
There were no blacks in the Marine. The Mumford Marines had just got the awards from the president. There were no Marines, no Navy. We just the Army when I first started. You see, this all came about after during halfway through World War II. Everything started moving, loosening up.
Has the Buffalo Soldiers received an award from a president, United States president? Have they been recognized in that?
They know. I'll show you the pictures there of Clinton, of President Clinton with the and a lot of people don't know. In World War I, the blacks did not serve under United States flag. They served under French flag. They won the Croix de Guerre. And that's the highest award of the French government. The Croix de Guerre. See, a lot of people don't know history. We did not have the luxury of press. We didn't have a general now. He has orderlies. He has his own almost press people to keep him advised or up on things, what he's doing. We did not have that. If you look at a lot of history books, the 9th and 10th Cavalry was here. San Juan Hill. They went up San Juan Hill with Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt they were repressed. They went up the hill at San Juan and driven back twice. The 9th Cavalry and 10th Cavalry came in and went before them overnight, and they took Sergeant Berry of the 9th Cavalry. He took the guidon and planted the flag up there. They went up there. President Roosevelt said that he would, Teddy Roosevelt said that he would look out for the Buffalo Soldiers, but in order to get the Southern vote, he said the Rough Riders did all the work. And that's in the history books right now. I said a lot of people don't know that. We did not have the publicity. We didn't have a whole lot of pictures. We were just there to service the white troops. I was attached to the when the 3rd Cavalry, which was General Patton's, when they moved out, we had a man they forgot, and his name was Coley Davis. He was one that he marched for the tourists at the unknown soldier's tomb. He was black, 6-footer, a big, tall guy, and that's another thing. All those people that marched at the unknown soldier's tomb, they had to be over 6 feet tall. They had to be slim. I saw, now that was no blacks there, but all white. That didn't happen until they disintegrated the Army. And I've seen guys put on girdles to be able to, that assignment, you know, walking at the guard at the unknown soldier's tomb, which is kept 24 hours a day or all around the thing, even today.
When we had spoken earlier, you told me that there's, at Morgan University, the Buffalo Soldiers, and I'm assuming they're in this area, you meet on the 4th Saturday of the month.
We were there in, well, they were back this week from Arizona. But we meet now, we'll be, our next meeting will be August the 26th, or whatever, the 4th Saturday at 10 o'clock. We will meet there, and we'll hear about what happened at the convention and whether we're trying to hold a convention here for 2013. We had one about 6 or 7 years ago, and we were very successful with that.
How many members are in your group when you meet on those Saturdays? How many Buffalo Soldiers are still in that group when you meet? And when you meet at Morgan?
How many people are in there?
Yeah.
We may have about 40, 35, 40. We serve lunch after we meet. We have a fund set up that we serve lunch after we have our meeting. Our meeting is 2 hours long. We're there from 10 to 12. And at 12, usually about 12:15, they break, and then we eat, and from 12 to maybe 1:30, and then we go home. And see, there are 30 chapters, there are 30 chapters of the Buffalo Soldiers. We have a chapter in Hawaii, we had a chapter in Germany, and we got the rest of them are in the United States, all just different states, and some of them with 2 chapters. I think Virginia's got 2 of them now.
So your group, these chapters that you have formed, these are all ex-military people?
No, not all, but most of them. Their wives are with them. You know what I mean? Some of them wives joined in, you know, to help out, because we're all volunteers. Yes. We get no funding from the government, but we're volunteers, just in keeping the what happened with the Buffalo Soldiers.
So your group is open to other people joining who have not been part of the military?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And we got about half a dozen generals that were there, and even Marine Corps, some of the guys in the Marine Corps and whatnot, the ex-military, but that's it.
Well, I just want to thank you for taking the time today to give us your wonderful interview. This has been so enriching for us.